This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is December 4th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lonnebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, John Rustad's leadership comes to an end, and Carney is handling the pipeline MOU fallout internally and externally, but he might just be fine. We'll dig into it all. You can participate in the discussion by joining our Slack and by signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/politicos.
There's been so much drama with both of these stories. The Slack's a real good place to be getting that up to the minute discussion as everything was just unfolding the last day or two.
It was real productive for us. We did lots of work in our real jobs.
One could say we were professionally incapacitated for a little bit there.
So let's go through the last 48 hours, roughly, of what happened here in British Columbia. The first thing we hear is, I think it was yesterday morning, a majority of...
the night before it was starting to circulate.
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
A letter that a majority of BC Conservative MLAs have lost confidence in John Rustad and recommend that the board remove him as leader. Who were they? We don't know. They wanted to be anonymous because they feared retribution from Mr. Rustad.
Which, at this point, there's a majority of them. There's 20 of them in favor of dumping him, and another 19 that are somewhere between not taking a stand on this one and supporting Rustad. So, what would be the worst that could happen? If Rustad kicked them all out of the party, and then they went and formed their own new caucus, Rustad would no longer be official opposition leader because that new caucus would be larger than all of the rest, including the rump of the Conservatives at that point.
But they wouldn't have to carry the debt that the Conservatives are still in from the election, Scott.
Yeah, that's just sounding better and better.
And they wouldn't have the baggage that they're currently saddled with in terms of the last year of drama. So this letter came from a lawyer, was leaked to the press, and following that, yesterday we got news that the Conservative Party board had met and voted to remove John Rustad. They decided, using the constitution of the party, that he was professionally incapacitated, as you alluded to, noting that, as many noticed, the bylaws of the Conservative Party only allow the leader to be removed in the event that he resigns, dies, is incapacitated, or fails a leadership review of the members. And John Rustad, as we've discussed on this podcast, recently got 70% from those who voted in their convoluted membership process over the year.
The those who voted is pretty important asterisk on that one, because the turnout was low. Was it less than 2,000 people?
It was about 15% of the party members, I think they said.
So hardly a resounding endorsement, to say nothing of the rather convoluted process. But yeah, he did technically clear that hurdle. So that basically left the party either declaring him professionally incapacitated or, I guess, professionally dead. And at this point, it's hard to spot the difference on that.
We're removing him because he's politically dead because a majority of his caucus doesn't want him as their leader.
Exactly.
This was followed up by an internal caucus meeting where, and I'm pulling this from Rob Shaw's after reporting, about 30 MLAs voted against Rustad. Shaw also notes there were 2 scheduled Conservative caucus meetings earlier this week that were both cancelled by Rustad, which probably didn't help his case to stay on. Because, not being willing to meet the team you're supposed to be leader of is not a real sign of confidence on either side. So with all of that, the board also named Trevor Halford as the interim leader. It's an interesting choice, and we can get into that. But, primarily someone who is not interested in seeking the permanent leadership. And so going into question period yesterday, it's announced Trevor Halford is the interim leader of the Conservative Party, and John Rustad comes back with, I have not resigned. I have not been removed. I'm not going anywhere. A political party's board can throw around whatever creative terminology they like. Professional incapacitation, give me a break. Let me be clear, that's not a constitutional mechanism. And I'm quoting that from a tweet he later deleted.
And a few minutes after that went up, he showed up on the way to the legislative chamber and basically said something similar. But, this whole thing just gives a Monty Python on the Holy Grail's Black Knight vibe of, insisting it's just a minor flesh wound as he has his arms and legs completely chopped off and is just flailing about on the ground and seems to be the only person not realizing that he is beyond saving at this point.
Halford was asked about this situation as he came out and said, I've been chosen as interim leader. We're trying to figure out what this all means. Because I think he was assuming I'm going to call it a coup, but not in a violent or unjustifiable way, but a rules coup would have been smoother. They didn't foresee Rustad choosing the you can't fire me option. The sort of Kevin Falcon approach to politics by just sticking around. He's still the leader of BC United as far as we know. The best part of Shaw's reporting is all of this hinged as well on Halford and the board's group hoping they could go to the ref, Raj Chauhan, the speaker, and say, look, we have a majority of MLAs who back this guy as official opposition leader. You have to recognize him. And then they could have the, legitimacy of the legislature behind them as who is the leader of the opposition. And that's hella awkward for Raj.
Yeah, and turns out the legislature rules aren't super clear on what happens in the situation.
Because it doesn't come up.
Yeah, exactly. When you're drafting this, nobody thinks that a politician is going to be so incredibly tone deaf to everything that's going on that they're going to insist they are still leader of a party and can continue on when the caucus, the party board, half of the EDAs are all in open revolt against that. But
Well,
yeah,
and
so
the
there's that, and then
standing orders and the parliamentary procedure have an inherent deference to political parties to sort out for themselves who their leader is. It
Which makes a lot of
recognizes there are
sense.
leaders, but yeah, like you say, it needs to grant them some autonomy because the rules of the NDP are going to be different than the rules of the Greens, are going to be different than the rules of the Conservatives, and that can be healthy because it allows political evolution. But I guess you can run into a situation where caucus comes forward and says, we don't know who our leader is. Decide for us. And it's like, no. And that's kind of how it worked out, as when today was supposed to be the last day of sitting for the year. But it seems like the lieutenant governor showed up a little early, signed all the bills into law that had been passed, and they shut down a day early so that Raj didn't have to make any tough calls on this.
Saved by the bell on that one. I kind of wish he just made a call on this rather than dragging it out. I get he doesn't really want to, but it's also kind of a bit of a farce to let that go on and just kind of sit there being like, I don't know.
So the typical way the speaker has to deal with a situation like this
Is there a typical way?
Complicated procedural questions, I mean, not this specifically, but a complicated procedural question. He'll reserve judgment. He'll hear kind of both sides, the point of order, and then he'll go back and get, the clerk and experts, call up other speakers, all the wonky procedural academics who only ever get called for weird questions like this. And try to figure out like what is the precedent in the Westminster system, because that's one of the advantages of our system is there's several hundred years and multiple jurisdictions that you can draw from to figure out what to do. And so you take a few days actually, and I don't know what the time limit is. I think they prefer a quick answer, but it's not always the next day. But he would come back with a written ruling that he would read into Hansard as to his decision. And I think that's reasonable given the complexity involved, because you want to get it right? You set not binding precedent necessarily, but something other speakers will refer to. And he definitely wasn't going to do that on the spot. But now the problem's solved. As this morning, John Rustad had a good night's sleep and realized, what's more fun than everything he's been doing for the last year? Hanging out with his wife and his bird and just going back to quieter life. He's still going to be an MLA, but he does not want to be leader anymore, because it turns out no one does, except like 2 people in caucus, I think, endorsed him still.
I mean, a lot of people are going to be wanting that position, but I think at most he had, 5 people standing with him this was one of the other things we didn't touch on, but happened when they were coming out to do question period. There were, I think 5 other MLAs. They're like, we don't know. We don't think this is legitimate. This is all just an illegitimate attempt to oust the leader. So and for like a little while, it looked like we had, a Pope anti-Pope situation going on where there were just going to be like 2 leaders, each with their factions, and who knows what would happen. But I will say this, the memes that produced were solid.
Well, it was also really funny, right? Because the Trevor Halford gang in the Conservative Party of BC had control of the website, and they changed it to say, introducing our interim leader. But they didn't have control of the caucus website. So the caucus website for the MLAs in the legislature still said, John Rustad is leader. And, you could just look and go, well, there's the leader of caucus, and the leader of the official opposition is recognized in the legislature. And there's the leader of the Conservative Party of BC. They just happen to be different people. Usually they're the same, but, the king, like the King of England just happens to be the King of Canada, but they could be different people, Scott. They're just 2 titles for the same person.
Honestly, considering how difficult it is to actually get an amendment to the Constitution through, particularly in that case where you need all 10 provinces, it's entirely possible that the Brits will get rid of their monarchy before Canada would, and they would just stick around because nobody could figure something out to do it if that ever happened.
So, yeah, with Rustad was MLAs Rian Gasper, Sharon Hartwell, Christina Lowen, Jody Tour, and Corky Neufeld. On the other side, Halford had with him Ian Patton, Gavin Dew, Brennan Day, Heather Moss, Scott McInnes, Rosalind Bird, Claire Hattie, and Harman Bangu.
Plus a bunch of other unnamed ones that added up to the 20 and later 30.
Yeah, not everyone was like physically present with him. There were still some kind of hiding in anonymity. But Halford definitely had the stronger, like, numerical case. He might not have had the legal case because I think despite the lawyers who drafted these motions for the Conservative Party of BC and the majority of caucus, the idea of professional incapacitation stretches I think most people's understanding of what would have been meant in the plain reading context of that bylaw.
Oh yeah, if Rustad had stuck it out like it looked like he was going to and opted for a legal fight over this, there's a decent-ish chance that he would end up prevailing in a court battle on that. And the main reason I just say decent-ish is that courts are pretty reluctant to weigh into internal party squabblings. But this might have been such a stretch that courts could, in the words of one former leader, kind of look at that and go, give me a break. This is clearly stretching the definition beyond all reason.
Indeed. There's like interesting parliamentary philosophical questions here, right? About who should choose a party leader. Like fundamentally in Canada, it's the members, but at what point can caucus fire a leader?
Well, historically, it was caucus that chose leaders under the Westminster system, and that's kind of evolved away from that. But there's a pretty strong argument in terms of just tradition on that one. That
Australia still does it that way too, but they tend to have a lot more turnover in their leadership.
Yeah, and you have stuff like the UK Conservatives caucus will narrow it down to 2, and that goes to the members. So there's different ways to do it. I mean, federally, there's the Reform Act that has only limited uptake because it's a voluntary thing that caucuses decide for themselves at the start of a term. But that one, in theory, is there to push a little more power back to the caucus and determining leadership. So it really, there's a range of ways to do it, but caucus getting dissatisfied with the leader and turfing them is common enough. It should have its own heritage minute. And let's see what happened to Justin Trudeau. There wasn't a formal way for them to get rid of them, but when enough of them made their dissatisfaction known and it was clear that it was no longer feasible, granted it took a little while longer, but he eventually read the writing on the wall and stepped down on that one.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time the Liberals had a leadership review, but Justin Trudeau never did poorly in those, as far as I can remember.
I don't think he ever faced one because
the Liberals are weird.
Took over after the disastrous 2011 election, won the next election, won the subsequent elections, and then before he had a chance to be turfed by the voters, the party caucus eventually rose to the occasion and turfed him.
Oh, yeah. And apparently the federal Liberal and Conservative Party constitutions only have leadership reviews after an election loss.
Yes.
And so he technically kept winning. They might want to review that. It would be good to have just a good check-in, right? The NDP does that.
Yeah. I mean, you also see that with the Alberta UCP. I feel like we get leadership review stories out of there with a lot of regularity.
That's what got rid of Ralph Klein, was getting 60% in a leadership review, or 55%, I think it was, in this final one, right?
Yeah, and Jason Kenney. And I think there's something to be said for more regular reviews and stuff, but
as long as they aren't done by 5 people at a time at barbecues throughout 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. On the other hand, I can also see the argument that you don't necessarily want to have a leader or a government distracted by dealing with internal party matters on leadership reviews rather than doing the work of governing.
Oh, it's about checking in with the people who are going to keep you in power. That's all it is.
But that can also be done informally with the caucus if there was just a little more flexibility than most federal and provincial systems actually work in practice.
So, coming back to Rustad, it's just a really fascinating week in BC politics again. It's why I love this podcast, right? It's just wild to see someone be told you need to quit through made up means, and then him to say no, and everyone to just go, I don't know what's happening for, I guess, 24 hours.
Yeah, so BC used to have a reputation for having some really wild politics, and in recent years that kind of dialed down a bit. The end of the BC Liberal era in government and the most of the John Horgan years were pretty mild. Not actually a lot of real interesting stuff happened.
We had the wood chipper story.
I was just about to say, with the exception of the wood chipper story, which was an officer of the legislature. It wasn't an elected official doing something out of bounds or crazy. It was a legislature employee on that, which, yeah, we got a lot of great and amusing content over it, and there's still wood chipper jokes being made today.
I should say wood splitter, to be accurate.
Wood splitter, yes. But other than that, it was pretty stable, uneventful, not all that. It was, we spent most of our time talking about the mundane aspects of the various legislative things happening and whatnot, and it's kind of nice to actually just get some real wild politics back.
So this will touch off a leadership race in the BC Conservatives. We don't have any idea of how that's going to functionally play out. I think they'll be figuring that out over the next couple months. We do know that Chief of Staff to Leader of Official Opposition Brad Zubik is out of job. We'll see how much other turnover is internally. One weird thing that came up during all of this was the accusations from all over the place that John Rustad was basically like a woke liberal, or like had turned the party too liberal. This came from lots of internet trolls, but also Katie Merrifield, the like strategist and who's currently working with the federal Conservatives,
who ran Jonathan Wilkinson's leadership campaign, who is, by no means a far-right culture warrior.
And like the center-right in BC has always, when it's won, been a coalition of federal Conservatives and Liberals. Like there just aren't quite enough federal Conservatives in this province usually to win a majority government, so you need some of that spillover. I mean, maybe right now with some polls saying 40% of BC would vote federally Conservative, you could turn that into a majority government, but you're taking a narrow path versus like what has governed the province for most of the 20th century.
Not just a narrow path, but one that really counts on vote splitting to work in your favor. Because, the last election results, the last election results, the Conservatives got 43%. So that would actually mean they dropped 3% if they were capturing the federal Conservatives vote perfectly. And that wasn't enough to get them over the line last time. So you really have to have everything aligned perfectly, and that's not necessarily going to be able to happen again, or will happen in a way that can be counted on going forward.
And then I've also seen people say like, oh, John Rustad should go join 1BC now, and that also makes no sense to me. Like, nobody really knows what his politics are, is I think one thing that's come out of this entire saga is he's just the guy trying to get along.
Before he became leader, I don't think he had super well-defined politics on a lot of stuff. A little climate skeptical, kind of, conventionally conservative, but like not seemingly, the type that's like highly ideological that, will quote, Milton Friedman at you, or Adrian Vermeule, to pick a more current, more socially conservative one. That's not the perfect example, but you get what I'm saying. Like not that type of conservative, more just kind of
he was your like uncle who spent too much time on Facebook.
A little bit like that.
He, like, to his credit, I think he was, well, I know when he was in the BC Liberal government, he was like Minister of Aboriginal or Indigenous Affairs. And as far as I can tell, was relatively respected for it. Like, he didn't have a reactionary view on First Nations rights and title. Didn't mean he was like the most progressive, but he was willing to make positive relationships. And so, yeah, he seemed to have, in opposition, just kind of fallen onto some like Facebook conspiracies, hence why he got kicked out of the party for posting about carbon not being a greenhouse gas and stuff like that. And then it was always weird that he ended up leader, right? I guess how it happened, but
it's because the BC Conservatives weren't really a particularly serious party before he ended up deciding to run for leader, because that party with no seats had a vacant leadership spot, and he just being reduced to an independent. So he decided, why not go for the Conservative leadership and then build from there. That ended up working out pretty well, but it was a kind of weird set of historical contingencies on this, rather than a case where this was someone who, was clearly destined for, if not premier, at least leader of the opposition.
Yeah. And like aesthetically, it was always a bit weird, right? Like he wasn't a brightly charismatic speaker. I was having lunch. Yeah, I was having lunch out today, and I overheard a couple guys talking about Rustad, and one said to the other, "Do you know how old he is?" And the guy's like, "I don't know. He could be in his 70s. I'm going to guess 65." And he's like, "He's 62." And that's now, right? Like he became leader a couple years ago. I think he was in his 50s still. But the man, unfortunately for him, does not look so young. If you're being cruel and ageist, but it all worked against him. So he really did do something amazing with how far he got the party out of nowhere, but also missed the shot at the last second, and
didn't have the leadership chops to hold a admittedly pretty fractious coalition together. Which
it's an absolute mess of people, right? We've seen that after the election where he kicked out 2 MLAs, 3 others went with them at different stages, and so lost 10% of his caucus after winning a record number of MLAs.
Yeah, and that speaks to weak leadership. It's a tough coalition to hold together, but a good leader can keep a bunch of disparate factions focused on a singular goal, which is win the next election. But he didn't have the leadership ability to lead through means other than direct party discipline on that, which ultimately meant when something came up with troublesome MLAs or MLAs that weren't working to effectively advance that, there wasn't a lot of options but to hit them with the big stick of "you're out of the party," and that caused a whole bunch of problems, and ultimately just, I think, shows why good leadership is not necessarily about merely using the formal mechanisms you have at hand.
And I think the question for the next leader will be who, if any, of the independents at least, they'd be willing to welcome back. You have Jordan Keeley, who kind of left for the same reasons that the 1BC candidates did, and he stands kind of shoulder to shoulder with them more often than not, but also didn't join their caucus. And you have Eleanor Sturko and Amelia Bootby on the other side, the more moderate wing, who probably would go back under the right leader, but other leaders, they might be happy to stand independent.
Sturko was forced out. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting question on whether or not the new leader, even the interim leader, is willing to kind of undo that decision that Rustad made when he was not in a particularly popular place, and it cost him a fairly prominent MLA that... I don't know, was it ever really explained why he removed Sturto?
His official reason was she was plotting against him. She was like the most vocal of the MLAs questioning his leadership review and just generally being unhelpful and unsupportive.
Right, which means this can be a moment where the interim leader or the new permanent leader, whenever that gets decided, can do we're bridging the divides, healing the wounds in the party, and welcome back.
The problem is a bunch of people in the party don't like her. Right? There's on the social conservative wing especially, there are people very happy to see her out. And I can't see an interim leader taking the controversial position on anyone of, oh, you can come back to the party. I don't think that's their place, especially one who's been expelled.
I mean,
I would leave that to the permanent.
Yeah. The thing is, you do need people like Sturto in the coalition if you actually want to win. And the more hardcore conservatives are going to have to learn to put a little water in the wine on that sort of thing if they want to ever be more than just the opposition.
So the people who might want to come forward, and then we can move on this show, there's probably lots of names out there. The ones we're seeing floated around are Caroline Elliott, who would be interesting given she's, the sister-in-law of Kevin Falcon?
Think so. Right? It related or in the same family.
Yeah. North Shore former MLA, I want to say.
I think she did one term as an MLA.
Gavin Dew, current MLA in Kelowna on the more moderate wing. Harman Bangu, MLA, I believe in Surrey on the more socially conservative wing. Scott McInnes, MP Aaron Gunn, who didn't get to run for the BC Liberal leadership, could make a play, but he'd have to give up his, opposition role on the federal conservative bench to pursue this. So that's an iffy one. And that's a seat that he only narrowly won in the last election. So the conservatives federally probably don't want him jumping out. But then again, the difference between opposition and of a government of the federal party versus the potential of being premier could be tempting.
Yeah, I always got this sense that Gunn, or at least the little bits of the stuff I saw of him, was always a little more interested in BC stuff than federal, although definitely touched on a lot of federal stuff. So I could see him wanting to take a shot at the BC conservative leadership race.
The other one that could come up is Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West, which would be interesting, I guess. A little bit exhausting. But he'll have to decide if
Brad West
he's
a conservative? He has that populist energy to him, which these days definitely gets more right-coded, but hasn't he been in the past? He was a new Democrat,
so he did work for Mike Farnworth as a constituency assistant before running for POCO council and then becoming mayor. But it's quite obvious that his politics have gone kind of populist, but not in a left populist or reactionary anti-immigrant populist a lot of the time as mayor, and touching on a lot of international issues like immigration and Chinese investment in housing, alleged, as his focus there, or things he's talked about. He's an interesting one because I get the sense he's very good at being a mayor. I'm not trying to endorse his policies, but politically, he has staved off all opposition there. He ran the last election unopposed, so it was acclaimed. And by all senses, if he wants to run unopposed again, he probably will. So he can stay the big fish in the little pond. or he could try to pursue a bigger pond and see how big of a fish he really is. And I don't know. Allegedly, the Conservatives were holding the Port Coquitlam seat for him if he wanted to make the jump in the last election to provincial politics. And the Port Coquitlam candidate for the Conservatives wasn't announced until quite late. So it does track. But I think he knew better than to run against Mike Farnworth, who is a political machine, and he would have lost. So, I don't know. I have seen his name tossed around, but I don't know if he'll show up.
I'm going to guess not. He seems pretty happy being mayor. Just one quick correction on Caroline Elliott. She was not an MLA. I misremembered. She was going to be the BC United candidate for the North Shore.
Right. And so in the new year, we'll look for a leadership race to start taking shape in the BC Conservatives, and we'll see how quickly that comes together. It was interesting watching the members' statements yesterday on the last day of the legislature before question period as George Chow went off on some jokey anecdotes, but his question to everyone was you might be asking yourself, what if there's an election coming up? Who's asking that, George? Are you suggesting that's happening? Or are you just speculating? It was a weird statement, but he had a joke tone in his delivery.
But it could also be floated a trial balloon on that one. I think it would be best if they tried to run a fairly short leadership race. It's gone to be the tendency in BC and at least federally with the Conservatives. The Liberals managed to keep theirs fairly short. But it would be good to have a nice quick one, get someone in there rather than drag this out over a very long time where they're not going to be able to be effective in Victoria's opposition. That everything's going to be taken up with the internal party fights and battles on that. And additionally, they're in some fundraising trouble, and getting a permanent leader in place that can actually be focused on rebuilding the ground they have lost since the election, both with the fundraising and with the BC population, is going to be important. And it would be a strategic mistake to try and run this out over more than a year in the vain hope that this somehow generates a bunch of engagement outside of the core group of partisans, which is never how it actually works. It tends to just be the people who are interested in politics already that focus on these sorts of things and pay attention, and you rarely ever see a leadership race actually significantly move the numbers of supporters or anything like that.
I think there's a couple counterexamples to that, right? The Pierre Poilievre's leadership race brought in hundreds of thousands of members to the federal Conservatives, and he just steamrolled that. Jagmeet Singh did okay in bringing in new members, just no one else did.
Well, I think it's important we differentiate doing a membership drive, which is an important part of any leadership race, and actually building out the party and the brand. Which,
I think they need to take longer than the federal Liberals did. I think they should take 5 or 6 months because they need to figure out who they are. And rushing that to get someone in place who could be leader in the spring session for even half of it, as long as they have their leader by the summer, who can then, show up against David Eby in September, that's probably reasonable in my mind. Give a few months for people to sign up members. Don't rat fuck any of your leadership candidates like the Greens almost did to Emily Lowen, who was actually trying to build that party. And she was going to be my other example of someone who brought people into a party that otherwise was moribund. And by all accounts, the Conservatives could use some members right now, especially ones who aren't insane.
Yeah, right on that. The couple thought, wow, this is going to be the first time this party has actually had to run a leadership race as a major party and not a disparate group of volunteers for trying to keep a party that has no seats and no real prospects going. So, and where there's actually going to be real stakes and real attention on it. So it's going to be an interesting test of the party's organizational capabilities to actually pull that off. And the other thing is that I agree about the party needs to figure out what it is and find itself. I just worry that it's going to turn into kind of like we saw the final BC Liberal leadership race, where they kind of avoided really having those discussions. There was a bit of it, but it ultimately came down to the Kevin Falcon membership sales machine, and that did not help the BC Liberals figure out their identity issues and what they wanted to be and how to be an effective party. And if you run this out too long, it just becomes a 8-month slog of membership sales. You potentially run the risk of turning this not into a serious debate about the future of the party, but in a test of who hired the best organizers and who built out the most effective, though not necessarily most ethical or high engagement with the general populace membership sales team.
Yeah, like I said, 4 to 6 months is ideal. Turn our attention to the big federal story with its BC tie-in. We touched on it last week because it was being teased, and it pretty much came out exactly like that. The MOU between Canada and Alberta that BC didn't get invited to for the pipeline that's going to go through BC. But that's okay. It's a national project, and that's how these things work. That also didn't talk to any of the coastal First Nations who will be impacted and who have to be consulted on this. At the amount you have to consult them depends on who you ask, but it's been an interesting week seeing how that came out. Do you have thoughts? Let's start on the MOU itself, on the text versus what we were teased. I mean, it seemed like fairly close to the messaging, but maybe a little bit more deferential to Alberta, just like pinky promising to do stuff.
Yeah, the very high level thing of we're going to basically set up a pipeline, so rather than being a very heavy uphill battle to get it through the approvals process, and have a just flat out prohibition of actually putting the material on ship to export, which would render the whole thing impossible in a practical sense. We're going to basically set this up to, if someone comes forward with an actual proposal for it to succeed there, rather than basically tilting things kind of the way it was against it. So that part entirely expected, and that didn't also surprise me that there were some changes around the Alberta emissions target and the industrial carbon price and some stuff like that. What did surprise me was some of the stuff about the giveaways to Alberta that seemed separate from that. Specifically, the thing I'm thinking of there is the relaxation of the the clean electricity standards in Alberta. That seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, not be as directly linked to the core aspect of the MOU.
A lot of things that Carney gave are things that it gave a lot of things that Daniel Smith had been asking for.
Yeah, like in that sense, I get it. I just,
yeah.
this is a pipeline deal. those struck me as a surprise and not really what was laid out ahead of time.
Yeah. So big win for Alberta. It's not clear the pipeline will happen because it still does rely on a private partner coming forward, and as of yet, none exist. This has not committed the federal government to buy and build it, at least.
Yeah, and now that the tanker ban basically has there's a commitment from the federal government that is going to be relaxed in a way that would make such a project as a baseline more feasible. I'm going to be curious to see who, if anyone, actually comes through on this one, and whether the issues industry has raised about approvals not being clear on what exactly is going to be required, likelihood of success if they do invest in developing a full proposal and proceed to trying to get that approved. Just basically industries suggested that there's massive amounts of regulatory uncertainty and political risk associated with building these projects in Canada versus them investing in other jurisdictions. So I'm going to be curious if this and the referral to the Major Projects Office is enough to assuage those concerns where a proponent's actually going to come through, or if this is going to be one of those things where the government got itself out of the way a bit, but the underlying economics and business case just weren't quite there.
I'm betting on the latter, just on the simple fact that, like, we're rapidly approaching peak oil. Like, how much is anyone going to want to put into a pipeline to transport some of the... We're not talking just oil, right? We're talking tar sands bitumen. That's a pain in the ass to work with. Like, there's a reason it's so poorly valued, not just because it's hard to get to anywhere, but, like, it's an energy intensive product to work with. So sure, there is still some need for oil, but its outlook is not as hot as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And by the time this pipeline that doesn't exist comes to existence and oil flows to tankers to go, is 8 years, 9 years, 10 years at least. Like, maybe in an optimistic world, they can push this in 5 years, but I'd be shocked. So, like, I'm not sure who's buying this oil that they need to get out of the ground at the rate they think they will. I could be wrong, but which, you know, the other part of the MOU is a commitment to talk to BC about it, not to just engage us in conversations. Which EB's messaging has been kind of all over the place.
Everyone's messaging's been all over the place on this one.
Yeah.
You look at what the Liberal MPs are saying, and every single one of them, including the minister, seem to have a slightly different understanding of what that actually entails.
Well, especially on the Indigenous consultation.
But also just the how much BC has to say in this one.
It depends how much you're going to get voted in by BC voters or Quebec voters who also don't like pipelines as much.
Kind of. Though the polling we have at the moment basically shows majority support in every province except Quebec, including BC, or based on the Abacus's numbers on this, is sitting at 53% support to 30% opposed. Quebec, it's a plurality, but less than 50% at 42 to 26, and the rest of the country in approved ranges on that. So it's not clear that facing voter outside of a couple specific ridings are going to be the factor. If you look at the provincial aggregates, there's support on it.
But I think some of the most skeptical Liberal MPs have been Metro Vancouver ones, unsurprisingly, and Stephen Guillbeault, but we'll get back to him in a second. For David Eby's part, he said, I'm open to a new pipeline, but my main concern is keeping the tanker ban in place, which rules out this northern pipeline. Although the MOU doesn't explicitly say a northern pipeline, does it?
No, it just commits to lifting the restrictions on a northern run compared to a more southern route.
Yeah. So I guess it doesn't really matter what he says at this point. He kind of, I guess, has the sense that British Columbians, even especially among his base, are divided on this and not as opposed as they might have been several years ago. But so he's just trying to walk that tightrope there.
Yeah, it's actually a kind of interesting thing the way the discussion on this has played out, because you have very strong support to much less strong opposition on this one, but just the way the structure of the party system plays out, you have like 1.5 of the parties federally in support of it, and would it be like 3 or 4.5 in opposition to it federally. You have it dividing the governing party in BC, which just leads to an interesting thing where the political discourse is much more divided than the actual public opinion on this is, and you wouldn't necessarily guess where public opinion is based on how the politicians are reacting to it.
Yeah. But we did have Stephen Guillbeault resign from cabinet over this. We mentioned last week, I think, he was threatening to, and we joked that he always threatens and never follows through. Well, this time he followed through in resigning from cabinet, but he remains a Liberal MP, saying this was the straw that broke the camel's back, and so he's no longer Minister of Culture. As well, I noticed 2 climate advisors have quit the Net Zero Advisory Board. So that's more of an internal fallout, but they're just broadly frustrated that climate is entirely off the agenda of this government. And why be on an advisory board that's not advising on anything, or where your advice is ignored, more accurately?
Well, part of it is an understanding of what the role of advice is versus the role of being a decision maker. Because when something gets to the point where a first minister is having to make a decision on it, it's usually a 49-51 issue where there's arguments on both sides. There's people who can offer serious and considered advice in multiple directions on this, and where there are just a lot of factors to weigh, and where the subject matter experts on any one of those factors can have strong and compelling arguments for it, but you do need to take a holistic view as the decision maker and weigh all those relevant trade-offs, and there is a role for the advisors to be there offering the best advice they can, but understanding that the principal is going to make decisions that involve factors that they downrank or are not their subject matter area, and that's ultimately kind of fine because that's how running a big, complicated country has to go.
I think most people who join advisory bodies get that to a certain extent, but there is a line where you go, okay, I'm just not doing anything productive here. There is the line where, all right, I've given my advice and I see that they grappled with it and they chose a different path, but I can respect why they did that. And then there's just climate's just not on the agenda for Mark Carney. He promised Elizabeth May one thing, and now she is regretting having voted for the budget, which, spoiler alert, Elizabeth May could have seen this coming. He telegraphed it pretty fucking well. Egg on your face. You didn't even need to vote for the budget because there were enough conservatives ready to not vote for it. NDP could have voted against the budget. Like, the conservatives were willing to miss the vote on this one. Instead, everyone kind of embarrassed themselves that day, except the Liberals. And so, I don't know. I'll put a link to their statements. We don't need to talk more about that. Guillbeault's kind of interesting. Is, not particularly popular as far as I could tell in Quebec, and really not popular anywhere else. So I think he's not really going to be missed. What is very funny is that Carney appointed Mark Miller to fill in as Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture and Official Languages, and be the Quebec lieutenant. Or no, sorry, Joel Lightbound will be the Quebec lieutenant.
But Miller, are those both Anglophones? I don't know Lightbound as well, but Miller's definitely an Anglophone who has...
Well, Miller didn't have a great first week on the job, Scott.
No, and you do kind of have to wonder why he got appointed.
They needed someone who has a Quebec seat.
Yeah, they have plenty of those to choose from. But also, Miller's best known as a cabinet minister for his time as Minister of Immigration. And honestly, anyone who was in that immigration portfolio in the last 5-6 years were the hard-won and really one of the crown jewels in the Canadian system of a broad popular immigration consensus across parties was destroyed through carelessness on the file. Really should just never be in cabinet again. That's the sort of thing that once you destroy something that precious, you probably should not be trusted with important files again.
What is very funny is he was asked about his past comments where he said the French language is doing just fine, versus Quebecers who are afraid perpetually that it is dying, and I won't weigh in on that debate. But he said this week, in response to that, he's fed up with this debate that is, quote, generally identity-based. He did say it in French, and he did say it as a Quebecer, but kind of just was frustrated. He's like, Quebec brought in Bill 101. It's got this Charter of French Language. There's a Canada-Quebec Accord. We have done a lot to protect French. But François Legault and the Quebec nationalists in the PQ as well were not impressed by this and call him a disgrace to all Quebecers and say, we don't know how he'll show his face around Quebec, and maybe, I don't know, I guess Bonhomme's going to punch him in the face or something. That was not a Legault quote, but it would be funny. So yeah, great first week pissing off Quebec, Mark Miller. You give, François Legault's not doing well, and you gave him a chance to swing at Ottawa, and he took it. It'll be an interesting year next year when the PQ gets in and promises to do another referendum on separation.
Yeah, that's going to be a real mess when you have two sovereignty-ish because the Alberta one is we want to stay in Canada one, but it's a de facto sovereignty referendum. But yeah, two referendums going on across the country. That is just going to be a real mess, and I'm young enough that the era of national unity politics was more or less over by the time I started paying attention to politics. There were remnants of it, but I was 5 when the 95 election or 95 referendum happened. So didn't really influence me or shape my views of politics all that much. But I am really not looking forward to that coming back to the forefront and having to do another round or two of that. This time with the prairie provinces also getting their slice of the action on it.
Well, we don't have time to get into it, but I will just note that the Alberta referendum may not be, because Thomas Lukaszuk chose to put his petition forward as a policy recommendation, so it is now debated by the legislature, who gets to decide via a committee they appoint however they want, whether to actually put it to a referendum or to just quietly kill it internally. So they have an out on that, but the Quebec one is also, apparently Ottawa is prepping, but man, Mark Carney really seems to be running, and I've seen a number of columns pointing this out this past week, government as a, like, more a business deal than, like, the clear political challenges and trade-offs and balancing and personalities that it's going to take to go this the long run. But, like, maybe he'll impress me, but it's...
Yeah, I'm finding it refreshing that we have a prime minister that's willing to take some swings for the fences and not just hewing to the most politically cautious or advantageous route at any one time. It's actually kind of refreshing to see that kind of leadership out of Ottawa, and it's largely being missing through my entire adult life in Ottawa.
I don't know that I'd characterize it as swinging for the fences. It's more like a cautious austerity, and
it's more than has been for any of the other examples. And actually,
I'll give credit to Trudeau for decriminalizing marijuana. That was actually a more bold policy than most have done in a while.
Yeah.
We can criticize a lot of his other things, but that was something.
But yeah, there's definitely risks on that, and there's going to have to be some work to rebalance or shore up some of the weaknesses, or smooth over some of the ruffled feathers from how things are going, and whether or not he's able to pivot to handling that part is going to be interesting. And just one quick note: Joe Lightbound is a francophone, so at least the Quebec lieutenant is a francophone Quebecer rather than what's initially sounded like from the last name of an Anglophone.
But coming full circle on this episode, Mark Carney will have to learn how to balance his caucus personalities just as much as whoever leads the Conservative Party of BC going into the future. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.